representing the 28th Congressional District of the great state of California. Congressman, what a pleasure to have you with us on Viewpoint.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
Thank you, sir. So what do we think, sir? A great speech leading nowhere, or do you think this time there might be actual potential for some kind of change in the status quo?
Well, for the sake of the country, I hope it leads us somewhere. There are a lot of people who are still hurting, as you know, out there. And for most Americans, the economy has been and continues to be the top issue, the top concern that Americans have for their families and their future. So I'm glad that the president is out there and thinking creatively and trying to engage the other side, trying to make progress. I hope it is reciprocated. The early signs, though, are not encouraging. Republicans, even without really learning details of the president's proposal, are already trying to shut it down and pan it. It's unfortunately become just the nature of the opposition here that is very reflexive. Anything the president is for has to be, by definition, a bad idea. But we have to get beyond that dynamic. The American people are counting on it, and it's excruciatingly frustrating for those of us in Congress who came here to do something, to get things done, to see the economy trying to recover, taking steps toward recovery, but yet the Congress remains the biggest obstacle.
Indeed, and many Americans, as you know, sir, in the sane community, were shocked in 2011 that this president could pitch a jobs plan that was 60% tax cuts and still have the Republicans kill it on the floor of the House. He has pitched corporate tax changes before, but will tax reform be a motivator to get Republicans to work together with Democrats and maybe even help some of their constituents? Do you think that this is the carrot we've been waiting for?
I hope so, but there are two factions in the GOP that have been at war with each other. You have the faction that wants corporate tax reform, the kind of mainstream pro-business Republicans in the Republican conference. And then you have the Tea Party Republican base, which is very large in the House. And their primary concern, if not only concern, is really with attacking deficit and debt, defunding the government. So the part of the president's bargain, which would apply the savings we get from this tax reform to investments in infrastructure, investments in education, rather than simply this austerity plan of using everything to pay down deficit and debt, is going to run into trouble with those Tea Party members. So it will require leadership from the GOP, which we haven't seen really in the House. The Speaker, unfortunately, has had to be at the beck and call of a lot of the Tea Party activists. But on this issue, as on immigration, as on a whole variety of issues, you could have a very bipartisan coalition of the mainstream members of the GOP conference and with Democrats, but it would probably be a minority GOP vote.
I think you're right, Congressman. Of course, our Tea Party friends have been outraged about deficits since around January 21st, 2009. You may have heard this already, sir, but an NBC Wall Street Journal poll released last Wednesday found that Americans' disapproval of Congress has now reached unprecedented levels. According to the survey, 83% of citizens disapprove of the job Congress is doing in D.C. Only 12% approve of Congress's job. I think cannibals on bath salts have higher numbers, while 57% said they would replace every member of Congress if they could. My question to you, sir, you're one of the smartest men out there in the Congress. Do polls like this have any impact on your colleagues? Does it hurt them? Do any of your colleagues care when they see how despised they are by the American people?
Well, first of all, you're giving me way too much credit, but I thank you for it. But in terms of, do the members care about what these poll numbers say? Many of us do. I certainly do. But there is a large contingent that really only cares about tearing the government down, that didn't come here to govern, never made the transition to being a governing party. And there are so many gerrymandered districts among the red states that their only concern they have is not in the general election, that voters will be fed up and throw them out, but that they won't attack sufficiently to the right and they'll face a Tea Party challenge. So this is, unfortunately, the place that we're in, where the general election for a great many members is simply not an issue. And you have the proliferation of these very conservative super PACs that are now potentially targeting Mitch McConnell because they say he's not conservative enough. You can imagine how tough that will be to get him to make any kind of a responsible deal with the president if he has to guard his right flank. And, of course, that's exactly why they're doing it. So you have the nature of campaign finance now that makes it very hard. But a lot of those members simply don't care about the overall public polls. They only care about what the polling is like within that narrow conservative base that they have to answer in their party primary.
Well, of course, and sir, we all know if it wasn't for compromise, we never would have gotten the Declaration of Independence signed. I mean, they seem to have lost all sight of what government's supposed to do. And I hate to ask, but is there something Democrats haven't thought of yet that they could do that would better build a bridge with our recalcitrant Republican friends?
Well, I wish there were something that we could, stumble upon or divine. But I think the president has really made effort after effort. Certainly many of us in Congress have tried to do the same thing. But that assumes that the other side has the same motivation. And while it is true of a great many members in the GOP, in the House they're not in the majority. And so that makes governance very difficult. We've seen in the Senate they're able to get to yes on some very tough issues like immigration reform. But the House is a wholly different animal, and that has been a very frustrating factor that the House has given up a role in legislating. It's only a question of whether we're willing to pass what comes out of the Senate, and all too often the answer to that question is even no. So we have to find a way to break the logjam. Democrats have to continue to try, but we have to be clear-eyed about it, and the challenge is very extraordinary in the House.
Well, before we go, sir, one of the reasons why you're one of the smart ones is that I understand you're working on another piece of legislation to create a special privacy advocate who would appear in front of the FISA court. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. I think there are a number of reforms that would improve the FISA court. Some would involve declassifying significant FISA court opinions so the American people has a much better sense of what that court is deciding. Others would change the way we appoint justices or judges to the FISA court. Right now, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court appoints them all, and as a result, it's not a very diverse group. 10 of the 11 judges were appointed by Republican presidents, so I have legislation that would require presidential nomination and Senate confirmation of those judges. And then finally, as you point out, one of the key issues in the FISA court is they would really benefit from having the advice of opposing counsel, having opposing counsel that can test the government's arguments, that can point to potentially contrary case law. A number of the retired FISA court judges are coming forward now to suggest this would be a positive reform, and I hope to introduce a bill later this week that would use the privacy board to create a pool of attorneys that can be appointed, that can be given the security clearances necessary to provide that adversarial process in the FISA court. As a former prosecutor, I think that adversarial process really lends to a better result, a more informed court opinion, and I think would enjoy more public confidence as well.
From your lips, sir, Congressman Adam B. Schiff of California's 28th Congressional District, many thanks to you for coming on Viewpoint.
Pleasure.
Up next, another